So you just took a 16 personalities or MBTI or some other kind of personality test online for free, and now you're wondering, what do the letters and the result actually mean? So it has been your first time, or maybe you have taken the test a couple of times by now, but you're still confused. Then watch this video, because I will dispel a couple of myths and basically tell you what each letter tends to mean or what they actually look for in your personality answers, and how that is a problem and what is a better solution to that. Okay, welcome back to Type Evolution, where we talk about how to evolve with our personality type. So this is a very common issue. If you really look closely, they are not looking at the true Jungian personality types anymore. Nowadays, most tests that you find online that are for free have a very simplistic take on the personalities. They do not look for the functions, which is the most major flaw in those free tests. If a test is measuring the cognitive functions, the 8 cognitive functions, then you know it is probably a better test. If it is only measuring the 4 letters that are known most in MBTI and also in the other systems, but MBTI kind of made them popular. If the test only measures that, you can be pretty sure it is going to be inaccurate. And I'm going to tell you why. It's because these dichotomies are full of stereotypes. And like I said, they are not just measuring Jungian types anymore. They are actually giving you a big 5 result most of the time, or a result that is just basing itself on stereotypes on those 4 dichotomies. And the problem is those 4 dichotomies are including each 2 different functions. So yeah, this is the problem, and I'm gonna go through each one of them. So I'm bringing back the whiteboard just as a little overview. So I'm gonna go through each letter dichotomy and tell you what stereotypes they are actually measuring in their tests and why that is a problem. But before I go into that, I want to also make clear these tests are based on your view of yourself. And if you have already a bad view of yourself or an inaccurate view of yourself, it is most likely going to be an inaccurate test result. Also, what many people underestimate, many people are so focused on who they want to be or who they want to become that their test results reflects that. Some of them actually get a test result that is opposite to their real personality types. I have seen it with a couple of people. So they take the test and it gives them, actually funny enough, the exact opposite of what they are. So an ENTP takes that test and gets an ISFP as a result. And that is actually the exact opposite. It is not the opposite in all 4 letters, but it is the opposite when it comes to the cognitive functions. Once again, this is why I'm such a big proponent of actually going into the cognitive functions, because this is what Jungian personality types are based on, not just some big 5 stuff, which is not, it's like a separate system actually. Another disclaimer, so I also get people telling me, actually I got a correct test result from this. The problem is there are some people who get an accurate test result, but the majority of them get an inaccurate one. At least in my experience, in my typing experience as a personality typing person. I type people in sessions and they go with me through the questionnaire, and it is like actually one-on-one interactive online conversation, and that's how I determine the personality type with them. You can find more info about that on typeevolution.com/services, and please send me an email if you want to get typed by me. So we go through that process, and most of my clients told me that they got a different or an inaccurate test result in these online free tests, and that's why they sought me out. But this could be biased. Maybe it is, even if it is 50-50, let's say 50-50 that people get an inaccurate or accurate test result, it's still a problem because it's based on false, or let's say somewhat inaccurate stereotypes. Okay, that has been a long disclaimer list. Let's jump into it. So E versus I. If you get an E as a result, it's supposed to measure extroversion, but what it really measures, one aspect is your social skills. Do you have bad social skills or good social skills? And the irony is, introverts can have good social skills as well. They might get drained if they are too much extroverting themselves and putting themselves into the external world. But having social skills, knowing how to interact with people, knowing how to present yourself and all these things can either be learned or actually be part of your personality type. Stereotypically speaking, F-types are generally good at that kind of stuff, but there are some F-types who are not. So it really depends. But overall, social skills can be learned, and you can have bad and good social skills, no matter if you are an extrovert or introvert. So usually, like I said, usually for extroverts, they just try to figure out how good are your social skills. Okay, the next point. This is related to what I call the instinctual drives, the instinctual stackings, the instincts from Enneagram. So if you're not familiar with them, there are 3 instincts: social, sexual, and self-preservation. If your social instinct is at the bottom of your priority list, I have made videos about that. Basically, everyone has an order of their first, their second, and last instinct. And if the social instinct is last, meaning you care the least about social causes or social belonging or social acclaim or friendships and things like that, then they will also most likely type you as an introvert, even though you're not. If your social instinct first or second, you most likely will get typed as E, no matter if you are actually E or not. And I have made a video about the social instinct and how it is not about extroversion. I really want to emphasize this. Introverts can be interested in social causes, in social belonging, in politics, in friendships, in celebrity status, whatever, and still be introverts. So this is why it's really important to realize, are you actually an extrovert, or is your social instinct first or second, or vice versa? Are you actually an introvert, or is your social instinct last? For that, you will have to figure out your social priorities and Enneagram instincts. For that, you can also book a session with me. Okay, and then the third point, this is what I call ambiversion. And I know ambiversion is a problematic subject. I'm not literally saying you can be 50-50 introvert and extrovert, and this is very nicely explained by the cognitive functions. You have one cognitive function that is the first one. You cannot have 2 first cognitive functions. And the cognitive functions have either introversion or extroversion in them. So this is how people are either introverts or extroverts. But if you take these random online tests that are only based on the 4 letters, you can get like an almost 50-50 extrovert or introvert result. So this once again shows that it's not really based on the foundation of the cognitive functions. And when I say ambiverted, I mean just an extrovert that is leaning towards introversion, or an introvert that is leaning towards extroversion. I have also made a video about the 3 subtypes for the 16 personalities. So you can be the subtype that is a stereotypical introvert or extrovert. You can be a subtype that is ambiverted, leaning towards introversion or extroversion. Or you can be a subtype that is just the basic standard average version of the type without a subtype. So yeah, you can be an extrovert that is leaning towards introversion, meaning you have a certain preference also for your introverted function and you go into it fairly regularly. However, your first function is still extroverted. So if you're that kind of extrovert, you could get I, introvert, as a result in the test, and vice versa. You could be an introvert that has an extroverted subtype that is going into the extroverted function quite a bit, but it's not their first one. You might also get E, extrovert, as a result, and that would be a problem. Okay, so these are the 3 most common issues with E versus I. So overall, the 3 points are: first, it is measuring your skill in social interactions, and that's something that can be learned. Secondly, so to speak, measuring how much you care about social things, but that is actually determined by your social drives or social instinct, how it is ordered, if it is first, second, or if it is last. If it is last, you're most likely gonna get an I as a result, introvert, not always, but oftentimes. And if it is first, you could get extrovert as a result, even though you're not an extrovert. Social interest and extroversion are not the same. And this is something that, in my opinion, Big 5 gets wrong about personality. But once again, I am basing this on the cognitive functions. And I'm a bit more purist when it comes to Jungian 16 personalities, so that's why. And yeah, the third point, you could be a so-called ambivert that is leaning towards the other direction a bit, without actually being the other thing. Okay, let's go into N versus S. I already made a video about this dump sensor, so you should watch that video if you are wondering about N versus S a lot. Okay, some N stereotypes that they're actually measuring. High IQ or high intelligence. Usually what I see is basically, the funny thing is, okay, most people who are interested in this stuff are naturally more intelligent. I'm not exactly sure how it works, but people who have high intelligence tend to seek out personality type theories oftentimes. So almost all people who take the test get N, especially for the first time, even though they're not N. So they might just measure how smart you are, how intelligent you seem. On the flip side, unfortunately, the negative stereotype is if you have an average intelligence or you're below average, then you're more likely going to get S as a result. But I made this video that sensors are not always stupid. They can be smarter than you would think. They can even be smarter than some intuitives out there. It really depends on the person. Okay, the next is negative or inaccurate stereotype, open-mindedness. And this is very much based on Big Five. How open-minded are you, or how closed-minded you are? If you're more closed-minded, you will more likely going to get S as a result. If you're more open-minded, more likely N. So that basically means, are you open towards different cultures, different ways of life, different lifestyles, different values? Like just generally open-minded to experiences, like travel, things like that. Or are you more closed-minded? And this does not necessarily mean, you don't even have to be like racist or bigoted. It just means you are more uncomfortable with when it comes to traveling to other cultures, engaging with different cultures from your own, engaging with people who are different from you, different values, different morals, different ways of life, then you are more likely going to get S as a result. So this is one of those stereotypes. However, like I keep saying in my dumb sensor video, sensors can be open-minded. They can be open to different cultures. They can be very much into travel, different interactions with different values and so forth. So that's why I think it's a bad stereotype that they keep looking for that in those average tests. Like one of the common questions are things like, are you interested in philosophical discussions? Just because you are interested in it signifies open-mindedness. So most of these tests would think, oh, he or she is interested in psychological or philosophical discussions, that means they must be N. No, it doesn't. The truth is, just being interested in something doesn't necessarily mean that you are good at it, right? Like, let's assume that the people who are best at philosophy are N types. If they would actually measure how good you are at it, then maybe we could talk about it. But because they're only measuring if you are interested in it, it doesn't really mean anything. It's like saying, yeah, if you are interested in, I don't know, whatever, like you could be interested in anything, it does not mean that you are good at it. And I also mentioned in my dump sensor video that actually sensing types yearn for intuition, and especially if they are open-minded, they will yearn for philosophical discussions. They will actually want to have those discussions with a partner or with a friend or whatever, because they don't really have it in them because they're S. I mean, they can have it in them, of course, but it's not as sophisticated, or it's not as pronounced in them, let's say. Okay, the next point. For the next point, I'm most likely going to make a video about this because this is also a big problem. So you might get N as a result just because you are, so to speak, creative. Or on the other hand, if you are not creative, you might just get S as a result. So what does that really mean? Well, no, you can't be creative without being an N type. Creativity, it depends on your intelligence level. It depends on how open-minded you are. Usually it goes all together hand in hand, but not always. And yeah, just it depends a lot on your cognitive function. People can be creative in each cognitive function. I know that especially extroverted intuition is kind of known for the creative function, but I talked a bit more about this in my video Introverts and Extroverted Functions, where I mentioned extroverted intuition. And I think I also mentioned how it is different from, let's say, TI or even SE. Like, you can be creative. Let's say you're coming up with a new clothing line. That is creative, but it is not intuition, it's sensing. Like figuring out the fabrics, figuring out the design, the style, that is sensing. That's a sensing creativity. It is not an intuitive creativity. So people might think, oh, I'm so creative with all these things, but it might just be sensing related. Or even if you come up with different systems and models, you might also think, oh, it means I'm an N-type. It just means you are creative with your thinking function, with your logic. So this is one huge issue that I see with this dichotomy and creativity means N. You can be creative with other functions as well. Okay, the next common point for N that I also mentioned in my dumb sensor video, liberalism. Usually if you are liberal in terms of your political outlook, you are most likely going to get N as a result as well. And on the other hand, if you're conservative, you're most likely going to get S as a result. Also, if you have like mainstream interests, then you're also most likely going to get S as a result. But like, once again, N-types can be liberal or conservative. S-types can be liberal or conservative as well. Once again, this is really based on Big Five a lot, unfortunately not on the cognitive functions most of the time. There are certain trends, I have to admit. So especially SI tends to have a focus on what is familiar. And I describe this more in my video Extroverts and Introverted Functions, where I talk about SI. But still, an SI type can still be creative, can still be open-minded to different cultures, can also be liberal, like basically meaning they would vote for a liberal party. That happens. S-types do that as well. Once again, as I mentioned in the beginning, there is still the chance that you actually are N or S based on the test result. But if you meet certain stereotypes that I just mentioned, then you really have to overthink it and you should really go into the cognitive functions or get a session with me. Okay, the next one. Let's go to F versus T. Usually F means agreeable. Are you an agreeable person? Agreeable means, do you like to get along with people? Do you not voice negative opinions or criticisms a lot? So if that's the case, you will get F as a result, even though you might not even be F. And on the other hand, if you are very disagreeable, if you tend to pick fights with people, like verbal fights, if you tend to disagree with people a lot, basically, like criticize them or just to disagree a lot, you will get T as a result. But the thing is, in reality, F-types can also be disagreeable. Okay, the next point. This is about attachment style. I don't know if you know about attachment style. So generally you can group it into secure, anxious, avoidant. So an anxious attachment style is more likely gonna make you experience emotions strongly, and it's also often causing people to kind of lash out and have like a nervous breakdown almost when it comes to attaching to someone. And yeah, their emotions are on overdrive, and they can also tend to be like clingy or needy when it goes badly. And if that's the case for you, you are also more likely going to get F as a result, even though you're not, just because you have these tendencies. And on the other hand, avoidant attachment. So if you tend to avoid your negative emotions or just emotions in general, if you hold people at a distance, if you distance yourself a lot from people, if you don't get close to people, those are the signs that you have an avoidant attachment style. You basically avoid attaching yourself to people. No, that does not mean that you are a T-type. It can mean that you are one, but not necessarily. There might be certain correlations, but you can be an F-type that has avoidant inclinations. But attachment styles, there are a few, let's say, correlations with type, but once again, any personality type can have any attachment style. And also your attachment style can change. And when it comes to Jungian types, anything that changes to a drastic amount is not really based on Jungian type, because the Jungian type does not change, and I made a video about that. So if it's anything that can change, for example, like I said earlier, social skills, you can learn social skills. Political views might change. So yeah, anything that can change in this drastic manner, usually means it is not actually about Jungian type. It is about something that is changeable and flexible, whereas Jungian type, the standard type itself does not change. And I know seems a bit counterintuitive because they say, yeah, feeling type. In socionics, it's called ethics. Well, it also might not always entirely apply to everyone, but just because you are a so-called feeling type does not mean you're always super emotional or that you're always in touch with your emotions. You can be out of touch with your emotions. You cannot be able to understand them that well. FI and FE are very specific modalities of cognitive functioning. It's not just feeling things. T-types can also feel things. It's almost like being like, yeah, well, like let's say someone falls in love and is actually a T-type, and then they think, oh, I am so much in touch with my feelings for the other person. I must be an F-type now. You know, like this is how you can get these mistypes. Okay, the next one, this is Enneagram related. So if you don't know about Enneagram, you might skip this one. But basically, if you're an Enneagram type 3, you might get F as a result, even though you're not. Because Enneagram 3 is very much focused on what is considered successful or attractive currently in their environment, in their social environment, so to speak. And they're also very image focused, and that can make someone seem like an F-type even though they're not. If you are Enneagram type 7, then you also might get T as a result, even though you're not T. Simply because Enneagram 7 is either very focused on mental activity or activity in the outside world, like either NE or SE based. And also they avoid negative emotions usually, like they are so-called positive types, and those types tend to avoid negative emotions. So that kind of almost overlaps with the previous point. Just because you avoid certain emotions does not mean you are a T-type. And at last, of course, once again, it might actually be correct, but oftentimes it's not, especially if you fall into the stereotypes I just mentioned. Yeah, okay. All right, last but definitely not least, one of the most problematic points. I would say, when it boils down to it, I think the most common mistype is the J and P. And this is basically just about conscientiousness in Big Five. So J, the stereotypes are you are punctual and you are orderly. Whereas with P, the stereotype is that you are messy, you are unpunctual, and that's basically just conscientious versus not conscientious. I have written a big article about lots of the Big Five myths and problems, and you can find them on typevolution.com, and you will also find the link in the description. So I explained there a bit more the J and P problems, and I also made a video about J and P problems. But basically, in true, purest Jungian personality type fashion, J and P is based on the functions, and it's based on whether your second function in MBTI at least is either perceiving or a judging function. And in socionics, whether your first function is perceiving or judging. That's really it. Or let's say, personally, I don't even like to use in J and P anymore because it's just creating so many confusions. But anyway, you can be a conscientious, let's say P-type, or an unconscientious J-type. Once again, there are certain correlations. Especially EJ types tend to be conscientious usually because TE and FE have indeed a bit of a structural component to it. They tend to structure their environments more. So this is why in the case of EJs, like INFJ, ENTJ, ESFJ, ESTJ, the J thing, stereotype, often works. But for all the other types, it usually does not work in my experience and based on the stereotype and based on the Jungian functions. Usually it does not work for them because any type can be conscientious or not conscientious. Any type can be messy or not messy. Any type can learn to become more punctual, especially in the working force or in the work environment. You have to learn to be punctual. You cannot be late all the time, otherwise you lose your job, right? So once again, this is a trait that can change and that can be improved upon and can be changed drastically even. So this is once again a sign that it is not really true Jungian personality trait. It is just a big five thing that can change over time. And it is, in a way, I guess, a personality trait, but it is not one that is actually a Jungian personality type trait. So okay, this is basically my overview of what your test results actually means. Rewatch the video if you need to hear it again and if you need to take some notes, and really look at it and compare it to your test results. So the first step, okay, is it possible, also I guess based on the descriptions, but also many descriptions are flawed as well, but let's assume the descriptions are okay. Is it possible that your true personality could actually be the opposite of what you got, because you just want to be this personality type, you admire it, you strive to be like it, so you might get the opposite of what you are. So in the case of ENTP, for example, did you get an ISFP or ISFJ result? In the case of ISFP, did you get an ENTJ or ENTP or INTJ or INTP result, even though it doesn't seem to fit entirely, but you like it, so you stick with it, but you are actually an ISFP or even ESFP? Look at it like that. Is it possible you could actually be the opposite type? Believe it or not, for many people that is the case. Then the second step, you go through the stereotypes. So you go through the stereotypes that I mentioned for each of these dichotomies, and you look at, okay, do I fit those stereotypes? The more stereotypes you fit, the more likely you're going to get one of these letters. So then you have to ask yourself, am I actually using the correct functions? So you can find my overview of all the cognitive functions, how I describe them based on Jungian theory, on typevolution.com. I will also put the link in the description, Jung's Cognitive Functions Explained. Then you can see, okay, am I actually using those cognitive functions in that way or not? If you do not fit the stereotypes that I mentioned, so let's say you got S as a result, even though you are highly intelligent and you are very creative, and you still got S as a result, then that means most likely that the result is actually correct. Funny enough, actually then the opposite is true, right? Those stereotypes do not really define the true Jungian types. And yeah, so you might want to look up the cognitive functions on my blog, typevolution.com, or you get typed by me in a session. If you're still confused, then like I said, just go to my blog, go to my videos, soak up all the content, or if that takes too much time for you, you can just book a typing session with me. And for that, at this point, you have to send me an email. You find all the stuff on typevolution.com/services. All right, have a good day. Bye.